Hi and welcome back to the channel. Today was just kind of a random day of getting a couple of things done. I wanted to make dinner, make some bread. I also needed to get some elderberry syrup. I really wanted to try to make some cereal. It was supposed to all be done on one day, but it ended up spanning over two. But you'll see here, if you saw my other video, I just made a quick loaf of bread to go with dinner. I love having a bread machine so much because you can just put it together, you can sit it, start it, and then you can go about your day while it does all the work. It mixes, it does all the rising, it does the baking, it does everything. So I went ahead and put all this together, and then I actually headed to the gym while it did what it was supposed to do. I also decided I was going to make some chicken bog. That's what I grew up calling it, but it's chicken and rice with some sausage. And I wanted to go ahead and get my chicken pre-cooked, so I just put it in a pot of boiling water. I let it boil for about an hour, and then I took it out and just shredded the chicken. I'll link a recipe that I loosely went by below, but this is just something I kind of grew up eating. You do want to shred the chicken, let it cool before you put it in the fridge, but you can pre-do this so that you can just throw it together for dinner easily. You also want to make sure that you keep the water that you boiled the chicken in. I spilled it everywhere, but I tried not to. But you want to keep it because it has all of that flavor from boiling the chicken. And we will use that water when we go to make the chicken bog with the rice. Now after I got back, my bread was ready, completed, and I just took it out. And I like to rub a little butter on top while it's still warm. It just adds a little bit of flavor. And I said it in my last video, I don't really know exactly what it does, but I just like what it does texturally and how it just tastes so much better to just rub a little bit of butter on top. So for the chicken bog, you usually brown the sausage a little bit. So I just added a little bit of butter, added my sausage in, and just let that brown. And while that was crisping up, I went ahead and processed my garlic and my onions and some celery. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know I'm not a big fan of onions, like the texture of onions, so I puree my onions before I put it in there. So I just went ahead and threw everything in the food processor, the little mini food processor, so that I could puree that to put it into the chicken bog. And it actually turned out really nice because it was just kind of an overall flavor instead of having like bits and pieces of onion and celery, which I like. Also, my mom has the Cuisinart mini food processor, and it is a little bit bigger than my Ninja. They work so similarly, but I did like having the little bit of extra room. Also, I had to be really careful here because my parents' dog wanted to get up here with the onions, and that is obviously not a good thing, so I had to take a moment and make sure that he was far away and was not getting into the onions. So you can see here where everything is nice and pureed. And then it was time to pull out the sausage. So you can see it's browning really nicely. It's getting good and crispy. Once it was brown the way that I like it, I pulled it out and put it on a paper towel just to let some of the oil drain off of it. I try to do that so that the actual meal that I'm cooking isn't quite as like oily. Added a little bit more butter, and then it was time to put the puree of onions, garlic, and celery. And I just used that mixture, or the moisture from that mixture, to really get all of those brown bits off of the bottom of the pot where I had sauteed the sausage. Then I added about 8 cups of that water that I put aside that we had boiled the chicken in earlier. It's essentially a homemade chicken broth. Then I added my 4 cups of rice, gave it a good stir. And I forgot to film it, but then you're gonna add that shredded chicken back in. You're just gonna give it a good mix, bring it up to a boil, and then turn it down, put it on a simmer, and just let it sit covered for the normal amount of time that you would cook rice, so about 20 minutes. I did stir mine every now and then, and I did end up having to add a little extra liquid to it, but that's why checking it is so good. Then I had this mishap, and I had to film it, threw rice everywhere. Anyway, back to the chicken bog. One thing I like to add that isn't always in recipes is a little bit of Parmesan. I think it just adds a little something. And then the very last thing you want to do is add your sausage back in. Then you'll give it a good mix, and it's honestly ready to eat. So the next morning I decided to make some cereal. I have been craving honey smacks or sugar smacks. They're called different things by different people, but I bought some and just did not like the ingredients at all. So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna see if I can just make them on my own. I did a little bit of research, watched some YouTube videos, pulled some recipes, and just decided, you know, let's try this. So I did 1 teaspoon of oil, and then I added 2 teaspoons of honey and 2 teaspoons of maple syrup. And that was kind of my, I guess, sauce that you want to say that I put over the puff cereal that I bought. Now, later on, you'll see I did end up adding a little bit more oil, a little bit more maple syrup, and a little bit more honey. So if you're gonna do a full bag like I do, I would actually suggest doing 2 tablespoons of oil and then 3 tablespoons each of maple syrup and honey. That's what I'm gonna try next time. But I just used the puff, I think it's called khorasan, but it's essentially puff Kamut. You could do either. And then you just pour that mixture right on top, and then you're gonna mix it. And you mix it a good bit actually, because you want every single kernel to be covered with this, you know, sugary mixture. I did add a little bit of salt just for flavoring and just mixed it really, really well. Now I did preheat my oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit before I started mixing everything together. I saw where some people were cooking it at a little bit higher temperature for a little less time. I really liked how this one turned out, so I will continue to cook it at a lower temperature for a little bit longer time, so that it really just kind of dries it out and gets that crispy texture that is known for, you know, sugar smacks or honey smacks, whatever you call them. Then I just put all of the cereal on a lined, a parchment paper lined pan, flattened it out, you know, just giving as much space in between all the kernels as I could. We do mix this a good bit actually, like every 10 to 15 minutes you're pulling it out and mixing it, but I wanted to give it a good start, put it in there, and then I set a timer for 45 minutes. Now this is where it becomes a little bit time consuming. Every about 10 to 15 minutes I did pull it out, I gave it a good mix, flattened it back out, and then put it back in there. And I think you would have to do this because you really want those, you know, the puff Kamut to be flipping, to get all the different sides, and you're doing it, you know, kind of dehydrating it almost, dehydrating the honey and the maple syrup onto the cereal. So I think that this is actually very necessary, and I just set many timers on my phone and would jump up, like I said, about every 10-15 minutes and do a quick stir. After it cooked for about 40 minutes, I tasted it and it was at the crispiness that I wanted, so I felt like it was done. So I just set it to the side and let it cool for about 15 minutes. And then I couldn't wait to taste it. I have never made this before and I was so excited. So I just got a quick little bowl just so I could taste it. I will say it is not identical, but it is super close. It was so good, and it was everything that I had wanted from honey smacks without all the artificial stuff. I actually looked at the ingredients one day of the honey smacks, and they literally have glucose syrup, and I just did not want any of that. So this turned out amazing and so delicious, and it's so close to the real thing. It also didn't last very long because my entire family loved it. Then I wanted to try making some elderberry syrup. My dad and I actually take it every morning during the cold seasons. And it can be quite expensive when you buy it certain places. So my mom got some berries, like freeze-dried berries from Azure, and I was just gonna make some for my dad and myself. And so you start off, the recipe that I found just did 3 cups of the freeze-dried berries, and you can use real berries or frozen berries, whatever you want. This was just more convenient for us. I added 2 cinnamon sticks, a little bit of clove, and then a little bit of ginger. What I read is you want those warm spices in it so that it actually kind of activates it when you drink it and lets your body know to kind of consume the nutrients. Then I brought that to a boil, turned it down, and let it simmer for about an hour. I did let it simmer with the cover on for 45 minutes and then for 15 minutes with the cover off. Next time I think I'm gonna do it 30 minutes with the cover on and then 30 minutes with it off, just so that it will actually thicken up a little bit more than this one did. So what you're seeing here is just me straining out all of the berries, the cinnamon sticks, because you just want the syrup at this point. So I did pull it out and strain it. I pressed it down just to make sure I was getting all the juice out of the berries and all those nutrients that you want when you're making elderberry syrup. So at this point, I decided to recruit a little bit of help from my brother and just let him actually pour the entire pot into the strainer just to make it easier. Then I actually did filter mine twice. So after we strained it, I actually strained it again because I just wanted to make sure that there weren't any little pieces of berries or anything like that. So I did strain it twice, and then I poured it in a mason jar. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna do 1 part of the elderberry syrup to 1 part of honey, essentially. So if you have 2.5 cups of elderberry syrup, you're gonna add 2 cups of honey, and that's just gonna give you more medicinal properties as long as your elderberry has cooled under 100 degrees. Now you want it still slightly warm so that the honey will dissolve, but you don't want it so hot that it kills all the good properties that are in the honey. Overall, I thought the elderberry syrup was really easy to make, and it tasted so good, or I thought it tasted really good. When it was warm, you could really taste the clove and the spices, but once it cooled in the fridge, it honestly tasted just like the ones that we had bought originally. I hope you enjoyed some of the recipes today, and if you try them, let me know. It's been so cold lately. I hope everyone is staying warm, and I will see you next time.